Okay. No, I don't want that. There you go. Facebook just being kind of weird. Okay. This. You know, like those like sometimes on Facebook, it'll just send you like this random person who you have zero mutual friends, doesn't live in remotely the same area of the world as you do, wants to be your friend. It's like, I smell scams coming on. Hmm. Oh, they changed this. Okay. Facebook does a lot of weird stuff. They just changed the whole like when you have your page or whatever, like a separate page from your profile, and your page has a profile, and then of course there's your own personal profile, right? And so when you want to, like, let's say you want to share, something you're putting on your page with like people on your profile, right? Then you have to change like, oh, I'm interacting as. So for example, on my Facebook, I have the Streaming Parson page, and then of course it's like, oh, I want to interact as myself, right? As Michael Ewan, and so. But then they moved where that was. So I was looking for like a good like 30 seconds. Like, where the heck is this thing? But anyway, starting kind of late, but we're here. And today, well, before that, I might as well do my more formal introduction. Hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson Reads the Book of Exodus. And today, we're just continuing more of God's instruction to Moses, primarily about the place of worship, the tabernacle, and of course, more specifically, in today's reading, we'll be talking about how the priests ought to dress and their duties. And so, where was I? Yes, I finished reading chapter 27, which was talking about the general area of the tabernacle. So, for those of you who don't know what that is, the tabernacle is a building. It's a tent where basically they would perform all the religious rites. This was long before the temple, of course, but when the Israelites were walking around the desert for like 40 years, then they had to obviously still do worship, but they didn't have a formal place, so they made a special tent for that reason, and it was called the Tabernacle. And of course, there's the tent, and then there's the courtyard around the tent. So that was where I left off reading last week. And for this week, we'll continue on with how the priests were to conduct themselves. Alright, so I'm going to be starting from chapter 28. If you wish to follow along, just whip up, like, I don't know, on your desktop, BibleGateway.com, or use the Bible app. Free Bible, why not use it, right? It's kind of bright, but I know it's going to get darker as, like, the day passes, because, like, it'll get dark at around, like, 5 o'clock. It's, like, 3 right now. So, anyway, if you want to follow along, you know, I'll give you a minute or so to flip there, and I will start us off with a word of prayer. Alright. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time that we have to read into your word. And as we read your word, we pray that you would illuminate to us and show us, you know, your desire in our lives and your will for our lives, and call us unto you as we read your word today. I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Alrighty. So, Exodus chapter 28. Let me get rid of this down. That's another reason why it was so bright, because, like, my monitor. But anyway. This is going to be Exodus 28. So have Aaron your brother brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar, so they may serve me as priest. Now make sacred garments for your brother Aaron, to give him dignity and honor. Tell all the skilled workers, of whom I have given wisdom in such matters, that they are able to make garments for Aaron, for his consecration, so that he may serve me as a priest. These are the garments that are to be made: a breastplate, an ephod, which is like a, how do I put it? An ephod is like something you wear, like kind of like a sweatshirt. A robe over the sweatshirt, a woven tunic for the body, a turban, a headpiece, and a sash for decoration, I guess, because you already have the ephod. Anyways, they are to make these sacred garments for your brother Aaron and his sons, so that they may serve me as priests. Have them use gold and blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, and fine linen. That comes up a lot, doesn't it? Anyways, make the ephod of gold and of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and of fine twisted linen, the skilled of worked hands. It is to have 2 shoulder pieces attached to 2 of its corners, so it can be fastened. Its skillfully woven waistband is to be like it, of 1 piece, with the ephod, and made with gold. It's hardcore. With blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and with finely twisted linen. Take 2 onyx stones and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel, in order of their birth. 6 names on 1 stone, and the remaining 6 on the other. Engrave the names of the sons of Israel on the 2 stones, the way a gem cutter engraves a seal. Then mount the stones in gold filigree, and fasten them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as memorial stones for the sons of Israel. Now Aaron is to bear the names on his shoulders as a memorial before the Lord. Make gold filigree settings, and 2 braided chains of pure gold, like a rope, and attach the chains to the setting. Verse 15. Now fashion a breastplate for making decisions. The skilled of work hands. Make it like the ephod, of gold and of blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, and of finely twisted linen. It is to be square, a span long and a span wide, and folded double. Then mount the first rows of precious stones onto it. The first row shall be carnelian, chrysolite, and beryl. The second row shall be of turquoise, lapis lazuli, and emerald. The third row shall be jacinth, agate, and amethyst. The fourth shall be topaz, onyx, and jasper. Mount them in gold filigree settings. These are to be the 12 sons, one for each of the names of the sons of Israel, each engraved like a seal, with the name of the one of the 12 tribes. Now for the breastplate, make braided chains of gold like a rope. Now make 2 gold rings for it, and fasten them to 2 corners of the breastplate. Fasten the 2 gold chains to the rings at the corners of the breastplate, and the other ends of the chains at the 2 settings, attaching them to the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. Now make 2 gold rings and attach them to the other 2 corners of the breastplate on the inside edge next to the ephod. Make 2 more gold rings and attach them to the bottom of the shoulder pieces on the front of the ephod, close to the seam just above the waistline of the ephod. The rings of the breastplate are to be tied to the rings of the ephod with blue cords, connecting it to the waistband so that the breastplate will not swing out of the ephod. Now whenever Aaron enters the holy place, he will bear the names of the sons of Israel over his heart on the breastplate of decision, as a continuing memorial before the Lord. Also put the Urim and the Thummim in the breastplate, so that they may be over Aaron's heart whenever he enters the presence of the Lord. Thus Aaron will always bear the means of making decisions for the Israelites over his heart before the Lord. Now make the robe of ephod entirely of blue cloth, with an opening for the head in its center. There shall be a woven edge like a collar around its opening, so that it will not tear. Make pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet yarns around the hem of the robe. Make pomegranates. Pomegranates, not pomegranates. One letter difference can change the entire word. I'm like, what? I kind of like, huh, at first, but I totally screwed that up. That's my bad. Pomegranates. Excuse me. Make pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn around the hem of the robe, with gold bells between them. The gold bells and the pomegranates are to alternate around the hem of the robe. Aaron must wear it when he ministers. The sound of bells will be heard when he enters the holy place before the Lord, and when he comes out, so that he will not die. Now make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it as a seal, holy to the Lord. Now fasten a blue cord to it and attach it to the turban, so that it may be in front of the turban. It will be on Aaron's forehead, and he will bear the guilt involved in the sacred gifts the Israelites consecrate. Whatever their gifts may be, it will be on Aaron's forehead continually, so that they will be accepted to the Lord. Now weave the tunic of linen, and make the turban of fine linen. The sash is to be the work of an embroiderer. Make tunics, sashes, and caps for Aaron's sons to give them dignity and honor. After you put these clothes on your brother Aaron and his sons, anoint and ordain them. Consecrate them so they may serve me as priests. Now make linen undergarments as a covering for the body, reaching from the waist to the thigh. Aaron and his sons must wear them whenever they enter the tent of meeting or approach the altar to minister in the holy place, so that they will not incur guilt and die. So this is the lasting ordinance for Aaron and his descendants. So that's chapter 28. And I'm going to whip up an image, because I should have done this earlier, of what the outfit would have looked like. Close enough. It's kind of a not very big. Let me see if I can get a better one. Nope, this is pretty small too. I'm trying to find like a good image here that, you know, fits the screen, because why are these other images so tiny? Okay. Well, you know what? You just have to make do. Okay, so this is the priestly garments that Moses was instructed to make for Aaron and his sons. So the guy on the left here, this is what Aaron's sons would have been required to wear. And this is the quote-unquote regular priest, the regular priestly garments. And then the high priest, which was Aaron, he would wear this outfit. And then, of course, there's a back profile with, like, you know, there's the ephod here. Or sorry, the ephod would be like the blue robe thingy, right? And then there's this, there's a sash here. You have the sorry, when I said the ephod was a shirt, that was incorrect. The ephod is the skirt, the colored skirt here. That's what the ephod actually is. My mistake. So this thing here is the ephod, and the ephod has like this weird rope thing that goes around, and then it's attached to the breastplate, and the breastplate has like the 12 stones on it. I don't remember all of them in order, and each stone has an engraving on it for each son of Israel. That's why there are 12 of them. He has the tunic, he's got the turban, and the turban has the blue lining and ribbon thing, and the blue ribbon is attached to the blue robe thingy. So this is what the high priest would have kind of looked like, and then the other priest would look like this. There's not much else to say about this chapter, because I mean, all God's really doing here is just telling Moses how Aaron should dress. The observation I do want to point out, though, now most Bible commentators will talk about how, like, you know, the high priest, and Jesus being the ultimate high priest, in the, as you read in the book of Hebrews, there's a thought here. I mean, once you talk about the book of Hebrews, it's kind of obvious, but like, the idea of the high priest was that the high priest was a representative before God, right? From people, between people and God. And that's why they wore the breastplate, and why there's the 12 stones, right? To represent the people of Israel. And so Aaron was supposed to be, like, in a sense, the representative before God, right? But of course, the high priest tradition would not be enough, because, you know, just because Aaron's the high priest doesn't mean he's perfect, right? Only God's perfect. Only Jesus is perfect. So when Jesus is high priest, as we talk about in the book of Hebrews, then you have a perfect priest to represent men. But for the sake of what God is trying to establish with the Israelites, and for them to emulate, was the idea that there would be a direct connection between men and God. And that was the main purpose of the high priest. And that's why, you know, there are certain passages about how, you know, well, let me just find where it is here. Okay, so I'm reading from verse 36 again. Now make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it as a seal, holy to the Lord. Fasten a blue cord to it and attach it to the turban. That would be this thing right here, the crown-looking thing in front of the turban. It will be on Aaron's forehead, and he will bear the guilt involved in the sacred gifts the Israelites consecrate, whatever their gifts might be. It will be on Aaron's forehead continually, so that they will be acceptable to the Lord. So this idea here was that, you know, Aaron is the representative before God. But of course, you know, this would be a tradition carried out. And I mean, some Orthodox Jews still kind of do this. Of course, certain things are omitted because, we live in the 21st century, but this tradition still lives on. But in the Christian worldview, this is no longer, well, that's not the right word for it. I wouldn't say it's no longer necessary, but rather we have a high priest, right? And that's, once again, the book of Hebrews is a great place to, do all your referencing of the stuff I'm talking about. But we have Jesus Christ to be the high priest, and so Jesus Christ is the one who bears all this stuff, and he is the quote unquote bear the guilt involved in the sacred gifts of that the people consecrate. So the idea is that Jesus Christ carries all of that instead of a high priest, right? But of course, in the book of Exodus, God was trying to teach Israel, the significance of how men and God were to relate, right? And this whole being holy before God, to cleanse ourselves of our sins and so on, right? And so that was the real point of why the priestly tradition was built the way it was. Okay, I'm just gonna get rid of this now. I don't need this anymore. Okay, so with that being said, some of this will make a little bit more sense when I reach chapter 29, because this is more of the purity rituals that a priest does as they prepare to do their priestly duties. Just a quick sip here. This is a really cool cup. My brother bought it because, I don't know, I guess he felt like it. But he's a big car guy, so he got this cup with the Chevrolet logo on it. I don't know, it's just cool. It's a nice glass too. The glass is decent quality. And it's a bigger cup than the plastic cups that I normally use. There's just something nice about having a glass, right? Anyway, sidetrack over. Continuing on. Chapter 29. So this is what you are to do to consecrate them, the priest, so that they may serve me as priest. Now take a young bull and 2 rams without defect, and from the finest wheat flour make round loaves without yeast, thick loaves without yeast, with olive oil mixed into it, and thin loaves without yeast and brushed with olive oil. That's a lot of olive oil. So put them in a basket and present them along with the bull and the 2 rams. Then bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance to the tent and wash them with water. As opposed to, take the garments and dress Aaron with the tunic and the robe of the ephod. The ephod itself and the breastplate, fasten the ephod on him by its skillfully woven waistband. Put the turban on his head and attach the sacred emblem to the turban. Now take the anointing oil and anoint him by pouring it on his head. That's annoying to clean out, I'm sure. Now bring his sons and dress them in tunics and fasten caps on them. Then tie sashes on Aaron and his sons. The priesthood is theirs by a lasting ordinance. Then you shall ordain Aaron and his sons. Now bring the bull to the front of the tent of meeting, and Aaron and his sons shall lay their hands on its head. Slaughter it in the Lord's presence at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Now take some of the bull's blood and put it on the horns of the altar with your fingers, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Oh, that's probably annoying to clean up. Then take all the fat of the internal organs, the long robe of the liver, the long lobe of the liver, and both kidneys with the fat on them, and burn them on the altar. But burn the bull's flesh and its hide and its intestines outside the camp. It is a sin offering. Probably because it would stink if you burned it inside the camp, but anyway. Take one of the rams, and Aaron and his sons shall lay their hands on its head. Slaughter it and take the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar. Now cut the ram into pieces and wash the internal organs and the legs, putting them with the head and the other pieces. Then burn the entire ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Lord, a pleasing aroma, a food offering presented to the Lord. Now take the other ram, and Aaron and his sons shall lay their hands on its head. Slaughter it, take some of its blood, and put it on the lobes on the right ears of Aaron and his sons, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Gross, but okay. Then splash blood against the sides of the altar. And take some blood from the altar and some of the anointing oil, and sprinkle it on Aaron and his garments, and on his sons and their garments. Then he and his sons and their garments will be consecrated. Now take from this ram the fat tail, the fat on the internal organs, the long lobe of the liver, both kidneys with the fat on them, and the right thigh. This is the ram for the ordination. Now from the basket of the bread made without yeast, which is before the Lord, take one round loaf, one thick loaf with olive oil mixed in, and one thin loaf. Now put all these in the hands of Aaron and his sons, and have them wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. That is like the most hilarious thing I've ever read. Just like, you wave it as a wave offering. Right? I mean, that's gotta be the funniest thing. I mean, I don't know if it's just a mere translation issue, but it's just funny to think you wave something, and it's like, this is the wave offering. I don't know, I just thought that was funny. Anyway, verse 25. Take then take them from their hands, the bread, and burn them on the altar along with the burnt offering for a pleasing aroma to the Lord, a food offering presented to the Lord. So, okay. After you take the breast of the lamb, after you take the breast of the ram for Aaron's ordination, wave it before the Lord as a wave offering, and it will be your share. I don't actually mean like they hold it in their hand and wave it. They probably put it like in a bowl and they lift it up. I think that's what it actually means. But it's just funny to call it a wave offering, which they call it here again in verse 26. Wave it before the Lord as a wave offering, and it will be your share. Now consecrate those parts of the ordination ram that belong to Aaron and his sons, the breast that was waved and the thigh that was presented. This is always to be the perpetual share from the Israelites for Aaron and his sons. It is the contribution the Israelites are to make before the Lord from their fellowship offerings. Now Aaron's sacred garments will belong to his descendants so that they can be anointed and ordained in them. The son who succeeds him as priest and comes to the tent of meeting to minister in the holy place is to wear them for 7 days. Now take the ram for the ordination and cook the meat in a sacred place. At the entrance of the tent of meeting, Aaron and his sons are to eat the meat of the ram and the bread that is in the basket. They are to eat these offerings by which atonement was made for their ordination and consecration. But no one else may eat them, because they are sacred. And if any of the meat of the ordination ram or any bread is left over till morning, burn it up, because it must not be eaten, because it is sacred. Basically, no leftovers allowed. Now do for Aaron and his sons everything I have commanded you, taking 7 days to ordain them. Sacrifice a bull each day as a sin offering to make atonement. Purify the altar by making atonement for it, and anoint it to consecrate it. For 7 days make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. And the altar will be the most holy, and whatever touches it will be holy. This is what you are to offer on the altar regularly each day. 2 lambs, a year old. Now offer one of them in the morning and the other one at twilight. So basically before nighttime. With the first lamb, offer 1/10 of an ephah. Just look at the measurement. Sorry, an ephah of the finest flour mixed with a quarter of a hin of oil from pressed olives. So that's roughly like about 3.5 pounds, which is an ephah, and the hin of olive oil would be about a quart. A quart is like a little bit less than a pint glass. I'm trying to think how big this thing is. This thing's a little bit. This thing is roughly a little bit smaller than a quart. I don't have a big enough cup here to drink from, but a pint would be like, like you think of like those movies and they have like guys with like those big cups when they're drinking at a bar. That's a pint. A quart is just a little bit smaller than that. Anyway, verse 41. Sacrifice the other lamb at twilight with the same grain offering and its drink offering as in the morning, a pleasing aroma, a food offering presented to the Lord. Now for the generations to come, this burnt offering is to be made regularly at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Before the Lord, there I will meet with you and speak to you. There also I will meet with the Israelites, and the place will be consecrated by my glory. So I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar, and will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. Then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. And that's chapter 29. And you know what the best part about this is? The last two verses literally explain the entirety of the rest of the chapter. So, chapter 29 is kind of weird, right? Because it has like the whole, like, you kill the animal, you slaughter it, and then you, like, use its blood as, like, paint, basically, onto the altar. Then you have to clean it after, so it's not really paint, but you get the idea, right? So basically, similar to, like, the Passover, where they, like, painted blood onto, like, the doorpost, they do the same thing with the altar. And obviously the same significance is there, right? Where if you think back to, chapter 11 and chapter 12 of Exodus, and this idea that, God, he comes down on the people, but it's not a pretty scene, right? If there is no sacrifice made, God basically goes on a killing frenzy, for lack of better words. And so the same kind of thing is happening here, right? And you think that the whole ritual in chapter 29 is kind of weird, right? Where they take the blood, the priests put a little bit of it on themselves, they put a little bit on their right ear, and they put some on their right hand, primarily their thumb, and they put it on their foot as well. And the idea is that, there's a blood covering, you can even call it that, so that God doesn't have to kill more, if that makes sense. Which I know some people would think this is ridiculous because God shouldn't have to kill at all. But once again, there's the whole, like, God cannot help, because that is the nature of, like, as long as human beings have sin, God must punish that, and death is the only real punishment. And so that is obviously being played out in this priestly ritual and the protection of man from God's wrath. And that's why they, slaughter the ram and the bull. They slaughter a whole bunch of bulls and rams. They slaughter other animals throughout the day, throughout the week, right? Because it's like when they do an ordination, when they ordain a priest, it's like a week-long process, which is hilarious because, like, you think of like modern pastor ordinations is nothing like this. But I mean, to be fair, 21st century, right? So things are different now, but they in the ancient world, right, these ordination processes would have been like grandeur, right? Whereas, like, I remember when a buddy of mine, he got ordained, and it was like, oh yeah, congratulations, we're gonna give you this, like, your certificate and everything, and we'll do a congregation prayer for you now that you're an ordained minister, blah, blah, blah. And then we're just going to go eat, like, some Chinese food in the basement, right? Like, that's kind of how we do it at a Chinese church, right? Like, whatever. Right? It's not as, but then, like, after that, it's kind of like, whatever, right? Like, the whole thing's only, like, 2 hours. So, but here, like, an ordination ceremony, this serious business, right? It's like 7 days. You kill, like, so many bulls, and each day, the the bull that sacrifices, like, this, like, quote unquote sacred food, and then the priests eat it, but no one else is allowed to eat it. It's like it's so bizarre, but, like, once again, there's this interesting idea of making the priests different from everyone else and separating them from everyone else, right? To be the holy people before God. And of course, we'll see more of those ramifications later when we talk about, like, the inheritance of the 12 tribes of Israel. That will come up way later. I don't even think it's in the book of Exodus. So that's assuming I do Leviticus after Exodus, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. I think I may do a more story book in the Bible, after Exodus, but we'll see. But regardless, if you were to keep reading after Exodus, there's a lot more detail of, like, okay, the Levites, which, Aaron is a Levite, they would be treated very differently, excuse me, in how they inherit before God, and because they're the role of the priest, they are actually separated from the rest of the Jewish people, and their priestly ordinances take precedence over being one of the 12 tribes, right? Something like that. But of course, one of the funny things where, like, I know what a lot of people, they ask these kind of questions, and they if you just read, at face value, right? You read the Bible at face value, there are certain things that kind of seem like, why would this happen? Isn't, like, God a spirit being? He doesn't need to, like, do certain things. And so we read in chapter 29, right, where there's these, like, food offering kind of rituals, right? And first there's the food offering for the priests, because the priests get kind of like the sacred food. And then, of course, there's, like, you sacrifice certain animals throughout the day, and you treat it as a food offering to God. And I know some pragmatists would be like, what the heck? Like, that sounds really wasteful, because, like, you're just burning up the food, right? You're just burning it into it's nothing, right? Well, that's a total waste, right? Because why would God need to eat, right? If God is all powerful, he doesn't need food, right? If he is truly self-sustained, he doesn't need food, right? So why the heck does God ask the Israelites for a food offering, right? But of course, the last couple passages kind of explain it, right? And it brings up this, once again, this interesting identity thing about God, and talking about, when I talked about the 10 Commandments a couple weeks ago, honestly, I should just do, like, the 10 Commandments own video. But when you talk about the 10 Commandments, right, and how does God begin the 10 Commandments, right? He begins it with a statement about who he is and his relationship to the people. And so God doesn't say, or rather, let me start with what he does say. He does say, I am the Lord your God who delivered you from Egypt, out of the land of bondage, right? So that is how God identifies himself to the people. That's the kind of identity he wants the Israelites to see him as. He doesn't say something like, well, I'm the God who created the universe, so you better listen up, right? So, as I mentioned in that stream, one of the major takeaways from that statement, from the first commandment, is, God is trying to identify himself as a friend of human beings. Of course, if he's your friend, it means you have, like, community with him. You hang out with your friends, right? Of course, unfortunately, because of COVID, that's not an easy thing to do. But, the idea is you hang out with your friends, right? And, on a total side note, talking about the COVID thing too, I remember one of the stupidest things, I don't know if this is true where you are, but in British Columbia, where I live, they have a stupid kind of bylaw, but a lot of people don't really care that much. So you see a lot of people actually breaking it, honestly. It's a bylaw, and how are people actually going to enforce this, right? kind of really dumb to make the bylaw in the first place if you have no plans of enforcing it. But the idea was, the bylaw was, you could not go to a restaurant with people that are not from your house. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. That's like one of the saddest things ever too, because like, isn't one of life's greatest joys is to just go out and eat with your friends? Like, that's one of life's greatest joys, right? Just go out, eat with your friends, right? Doesn't matter what that, it doesn't matter what you're eating, right? You know, the old saying, it's not about the venue, it's about the company, right? And so I remember when I heard that, I was like, this is stupid. And so many people are not going to listen. And, you know, you go outside and you find people don't care about that bylaw, right? People want to be out, right? People want to hang with their friends, eat with their friends, right? And it's one of the greatest joys of life, in my opinion. I mean, I don't even think it's my opinion. I think it's just the truth that eating out with your friends is one of the best things in life, right? It's what makes life so fulfilling. You know, life sucks a lot of the time, but, you know, you always feel like things are better when you just get to eat out with your friends. Anyway, what does this have to do with God and food offerings? Well, when God wants to identify himself as friend of the people, right? He's their deliverer. He's not their overruling, you know, I made you, so you know, therefore I get to tell you what to do, right? He's not lording that over them. He's not like, but instead God identifies himself as Israel's friend. And so as their friend, he wants to be in their midst, right? But at the same time, since he's a holy God and Israel is not holy, right? You got a bit of a there's a little bit of a, you know, a little clash there. But, you know, God makes some compromises, and that's why the sacrifice system is made. But the food offering stuff is what friends do, right? And if you read chapter 29 the way you know, if you just read it from, you know, in order, it talks about like, okay, this is what you do, so when God comes over, he's not gonna kill you. You know, murking you is not the first thing he's gonna do. And then the second part of chapter 29 is, well, this is what you do when you hang out with God. You eat out, kind of thing, right? And so, I guess you eat in because, you know, you're in the holy place, but that's besides the point. You get the idea, right? So, you know, you eat in, right? And so the food offering is kind of this like, okay, God is eating with Israel because he's their friend and wants to spend, you know, wants to spend time with them, right? And so, you know, you read at the end of chapter 29, then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God, and they will know I'm the Lord their God who brought them out of Egypt. See, he brings up the first commandment again. So that I may dwell among them, I am the Lord their God. And so that is the significance of the sacrifice and a lot of these like food sacrifice things, right? Which I know, like, if you just read it at face value, you're like, oh, this is weird, right? God doesn't need to eat, so why does he require food sacrifices? But in a way, a very practical way of looking at this, once again, you know, take this with like, this is just my best analogy for it. It's not really how it is, but this is my best analogy for it, right? It's how God is a guest into your home, right? And that's kind of what God is, you know, trying to invoke this idea in Israel. I am now a guest in your home, right? Because God lives in a place beyond, you know, human comprehension. He lives in heaven or whatever, right? And so, but when God comes to earth, which is his gift to us, right? He is our guest, right? And you should treat your guests decently, right? You don't, you know, you should be hospitable to your guest. And so that's kind of the idea God is, you know, having the Israelites perform with these ceremonies and sacrifices, right? And is to treat God as like an important guest, right? Because he is, right? He's the one who delivered them from Egypt, from the land of slavery. And so, you know, when he comes to visit, you better show that you're grateful. And so that's why the food offering system is the way that it is. But with that being said, there's really not much else to talk about with chapter 29. It's actually pretty straightforward. Sure, they do weird ritual things, and we don't do them as modern people. And in Christianity, They're not really required because, once again, Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice, so that whole like prepping the guest room, if you will, is not necessary. And of course, like, sure, we don't burn up food, but the idea of offering is that, like, you know, we still treat God well when He is our guest, right? And of course, He's not just our guest, but He is also a quote. He lives with us, right, in the Holy Spirit, right? He lives with us, and so the dynamic is a little different, right? And I think that's why the food offering thing is not as relevant with modern Christians today, because God is not just some anointed guest, but rather He is someone that we live with, right? Of course, there are other ramifications of that, right? Don't think it's easier because, well, God lives with you, so you don't have to do the food rituals. But actually, it's actually more difficult because then, imagine like the difference between how you treat a guest and how you treat your roommates, right? You're going to treat your roommates a lot better because, you might get kicked out or something like that. You might get evicted even, right? If you're not good to your roommates. And so the Holy Spirit kind of has that role. So it's very different in the Christian world, right? Because of that, there's a different dynamic, right? We have a roommate agreement with the Holy Spirit, as opposed to the ancient Israelites had a God as an honored guest in Israel's home. Of course, I know there might be some misinterpreting of like thinking that, well, is Israel then in charge? I was like, no, right? Because once again, God is, first of all, earth is the lesser place. The fact that God comes down, right, is kind of like a big deal, right? It's like the celebrity coming to the Joe Blow's house, right? So there's that kind of a distinction there as well. But in the Christian worldview, it's different because with the Spirit living in us, there's a different dynamic, right? And so it's more of a roommate agreement kind of thing, as opposed to just an honored guest coming into your house. There's a lot more advantages, with the roommate agreement, but at the same time there means a lot more responsibility as well. That's what I should have just started. I should have just opened with that, honestly. But when you read Exodus 29, you have to have that idea of the roommate agreement didn't exist yet, if you will, right? And so the Jewish relationship with God was different than what we have now, because of course what we have now is something much more intimate, as opposed to God being, He's still distant, right? And He's still kind of far away. That's why, there's the whole cloud imagery, right? And the cloud is meant to be kind of like a veil, right? And I use the Grim Reaper analogy a lot because there's that veil, right? God is covered, right? As opposed to, when we look at Christ on the cross, he's exposed, right? And so it's very, very different. But you can see in chapter 29 that God is trying to bridge that slowly, right? Because, you can't just do it all in one go, right? God is trying to bridge, the relationship that He wants with humans step by step. And He starts with what friends do, right? Well, friends eat out together. All right, let's start with that, right? Although at the same time, it's one of like the thing that most intimate friends do, because you probably have a lot of friends you don't go and eat out with very often, right? Of course, one of the other problems too with like the internet age, sure, you have a lot of internet friends, but are they really your friends, right? Because you may just talk to them in a chat room, and it's hard. Well, to be fair though, it's also hard, right? Especially if people live in different parts of the world, and the internet community is its own kind of new dynamic. But you think of like your friends in the city you live in, right? And some friends are more important than other ones, right? At least we all think that way because, as human beings, we only have so much time and resources, right? I can only go out and eat with my friends, whichever friends so many times, let alone, which friends I can actually spend time with, right? Because once again, time is a limited resource. I couldn't go to every single person that I was more than an acquaintance with and have lunch with them all the time. That wouldn't work, right? You'd be broke pretty fast too, right? Because eating out ain't cheap. But you get the idea. God is trying to establish this kind of relationship with us, right? And so the frequency of, you know, the burning, the food offering. So, I made the joke about like eating out all the time would be really expensive. And yeah, this is why this kind of seems like an expensive thing too. And in the Israelite world, it would have been expensive, right? If you sacrifice a full bull, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, right? Because people can make their livelihoods off their animals, right? They work the ground or whatever, right? Working a farm basically. And remember, everybody's a farmer for the most part, or you're a shepherd. Basically, you take care of the land and you till it, right? So to sacrifice a bull or a ram would have been like a pretty big cost, right? But the idea, you can think of like the eating out all the time idea, would be appropriate here, right? With how Israel and God's dynamic was. But you eventually, you know, here's another weird way of looking at it. You think of dating, right? When you start dating, you start with the expensive stuff pretty early, right? You take your date out to a nicer restaurant. You make sure you don't use any coupons on your first date. Those kind of things, right? And when you're in the early phases of dating, it can get pretty expensive because you're always going out, right? You go out to eat more, you go to different events and whatever, and they all cost money. And then as your date goes more long term, you know, you kind of slack a bit on that, right? You don't go out and eat all the time. You're not always going to the nicer places. You learn to be like, okay, we're gonna be smart with money, because then of course you're showing your date that you have other practical skills, right? Saving money is one of them. But of course, at the same time, you're building up for something bigger, right? If you end up marrying that person, right, you better be able to get down payment for your place to live or whatever, right? And that's just the start of it, a wedding fund, that crap ain't cheap, right? And so in a similar way, God's dynamic and his relationship with Israel, and by extension humanity, works in a similar fashion. So just pretend that, like, you can use this analogy. Once again, not the best analogy, but you got to work with it. Exodus 29 is like how you treat a first date, right? You better be willing to spend, because your dating prospects is not going to look good if you cheap out early, right? But of course, in the Christian world, imagine like you're like pretty far along the lines of like the dating, game, and now you're like, okay, I'm trying to save up for potentially us living together and whatever, right? Which is kind of what the Book of Revelation gets at, right? That God wants to live with us, and the new temple and all that stuff, right? Is the idea of like God, and and that's why there's a whole groom and bride language is also used in Revelation, right? It's that marriage step, right? Which is the hugest step, right? More or less, in a dating relationship. And so just imagine Exodus 29 is like, this is how you treat your first date, right? You don't cheap out, okay, guys? Like, and don't whip out any coupons on your first date. Don't go to a cheap place. You gotta go somewhere pretty. You gotta be willing to spend money, those kind of things. I totally. So the whole coupon thing as a joke, right? So, um, I have never done that. I have never done that. Thank God, right? Thank God I had the sense not to do that. But I knew a guy. I mean, they still ended up getting married. But I had a buddy who actually like, he took her to like a diner place, kind of like some kind of like those Hong Kong cafes, they're. Well, maybe some of you don't know what that is. So basically, a Hong Kong cafe. That's what we call it. It's basically like you get your fried rice platter or whatever, but it's not like a formal restaurant. It's more like a family diner. That's a good way of going about it. It's like a family diner, basically. That's what a Hong Kong cafe is, but, your Chinese food, right? But it's got mix, right? So, because I also live in a place called Vancouver, it's pretty multicultural, right? So it's like a bunch of Chinese people doing all kinds of food in a restaurant. That's what a Hong Kong cafe basically is. And so, buddy of mine took out his date to a Hong Kong cafe, which is already no, this is what you don't do. And so, and the thing was that like he had a membership there, right? So he gets like a discount because he's like a member of this place, right? And yeah, you're trying to be frugal with money, but you don't do it on your first date, right? Because it looks bad, right? Like the worst part was like a bunch of us were already eating there because I was there as well on my buddy's first date because I had a church meeting. It's like like myself and a couple of the other pastors just kind of like talking about church duties, and we're eating Chinese food at the same time because Chinese church is what we do. We go to a Hong Kong cafe while we're having a church meeting, right? Just and my buddy's on a date with this girl, and it just looks so like I'm watching. I'm just like I felt so bad for the girl. I was just like, oh my goodness, like you must be so embarrassed, especially when like like there's like yelling kids and like of course everybody there knows him too because he's a member of this place and he has like a membership too, right? Like, everybody knows this guy too, so everybody's like, hey man, how's it going? Is this your girlfriend? Right? Is this your date? Right? And everybody's just embarrassing this girl at no end. Of course they still got married a couple of years, like several years later, but it was pretty it was pretty funny. I don't know, I was just thinking about that. Don't do that. That's my if you're gonna learn anything from me today is don't do that, right? And not just with your human dates, if you will, but your date with God, right? Don't do something like that, okay? Don't cheap out, okay? Because in a similar fashion, God's gonna be pretty mad if you do that kind of crap on your first date with him, okay? Most girls rash, and then you think about like when girls get mad, and you think about it, you go, yeah, that makes sense, right? So don't do it, right? Don't do stupid things like that on your first date with anyone. Chapter 30. Exodus 30. So make an altar of acacia wood for burning incense. It is to be square, a cubit long, and a cubit wide, and 2 cubits high, so not a cube. Its horn and one piece with it. Overlay the top and all the sides of the horns with pure gold, and make a gold molding around it. Now make 2 gold rings for the altar below the molding, 2 on each of the opposite sides to hold the poles used to carry it. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Put the altar in front of the curtain that shields the ark of the covenant law before the atonement cover that is over the tablets of the covenant law. Okay? Where I will meet with you. Now Aaron must bring fragrant incense on the altar every morning when he tends the lamps. He must burn incense again when he lights the lamps at twilight, so incense will burn regularly before the Lord for the generations to come. Do not offer on this altar any other incense or any other burnt offering or grain offering, and do not pour a drink offering on it. So once a year Aaron shall make the atonement on its horns. This annual atonement must be made with the blood of the anointing sin offering, which God will cover later, for the generations to come. It is the most holy to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, when you take a census of the Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a ransom for his life at the time he is counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. Each one who crosses over to those already counted is to give a half shekel, according to the sanctuary's shekel, which weighs 20 gerahs. This half shekel is an offering to the Lord. All who cross over those 20 years old or more are to give an offering to the Lord. So basically, if you're an adult, you don't get to worm your way out. Hashtag adulting. The rich are not to give more than a half shekel, and the poor are not to give less, when you make an offering to the Lord to atone for your lives. Receive the atonement money from the Israelites and use it for the service of the tent of meeting. It will be a memorial for the Israelites before the Lord, making atonement for your lives. It's hardcore. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now make a bronze basin and its bronze stand for washing. Now place it between the tent of meeting and the altar and put some water in it. Aaron and his sons are to wash their hands and feet with water from it," as opposed to what? "Whenever they enter the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water so that they will not die. Also, when they approach the altar to minister by presenting a food offering to the Lord, they shall wash their hands and feet so that they will not die. This is to be a lasting ordinance for Aaron and his descendants for the generations to come." Then the Lord said to Moses, Take the following fine spices. 500 shekels of liquid myrrh. Half as much, that is 250 shekels, of fragrant cinnamon. 250 shekels of fragrant calamus. I think that's how you say that. Or is it calamu? Fire Emblem joke. 500 shekels of cassia, all according to the sanctuary shekel, and a hin of olive oil. Now make these into a sacred anointing oil, a fragrant blend, the work of a perfumer. It will be the sacred anointing oil. Then use it to anoint the tent of meeting, the ark of the covenant law, the table and its articles, the lampstand and its accessories. First yawn of the string. The altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering, and all of its utensils. And the basin with its stand. You shall consecrate them so that they will be most holy, and whatever touches them will be holy. So now anoint Aaron and his sons and consecrate them so that they may serve me as priests. Say to the Israelites, This is to be my sacred anointing oil for the generations to come. Do not pour it on anyone else's body, and do not use any other and do not make use of any other oil of the same formula. It is sacred, and you are to consider it sacred. Whoever makes perfume like it and puts it on anything or anyone other than a priest must be cut off from their people. The Lord said to Moses, Take fragrant spices, gum resin, onycha, galbanum, and pure frankincense, all in equal amounts, and make a fragrant blend of incense, the work of a perfumer. It is to be salted and pure and sacred. Grind some of it to powder and place it in front of the ark of the covenant law in the tent of meeting, where I will meet with you. It shall be most holy to you. Do not make any incense with this formula for yourselves. Consider it holy to the Lord. Whoever makes incense like it to enjoy its fragrance must be cut off from their people. And that's chapter 30. Okay, I'm going to just generate the picture of like the altar thing. What's it called again? Oh. So, it's a tiny image though. Just gotta work with it. This tiny thing here, this is the altar of acacia wood. Well, this is a modern one. which has been laced with metal. But the authentic look is there, so I guess it's fine. But this is what they would have used. I mean, you've seen these kind of things. It's not like a Jewish exclusive thing, right? It's basically just a big box where you burn stuff in it. Right? That's the whole point of it. And so, like, you burn some incense and stuff in this thing, right? So that's the acacia wood altar. It's just a thing to burn stuff in, primarily incense, of course. Okay, I don't think I need this anymore. Anyway, not much else to say about chapter 30. Once again, pretty straightforward. And there's once again this idea that like God gets an exclusive treatment. So there's these funny passages where it's like, okay, you're gonna make this particular incense and this fragrance for the acacia wood altar, for this thing, right? You're gonna make a specific fragrance, and you're not allowed to make that fragrance for other stuff. Like you can't use it as like a woman's perfume or a man's cologne. You get the idea, right? You cannot use it for those things. And so the idea is just that, God gets special treatment, which is really fundamentally the reason why a lot of the rituals are the way that they are. It's just to invoke the idea that since God is, you're a deliverer from Egypt and all that, God gets special treatment. So God gets to pick the scent that you offer him, right? And no one else is allowed to use it, right? That's kind of the idea that's being suggested. There's also the anointing oil. They say, oh, use this kind of oil and use this mix, right? But only for, the sacred duties. You can't use this oil for like, well, I mean, I don't know if it's like a cooking oil. I mean, I assume there's cooking oil in it. So you couldn't use it for like cooking. You can't use it for like, a skin product, right? Not allowed. These particular fragrances and ointments were only for the burning, the acacia wood altar thing, right? And the only real idea that's being suggested is that God gets special treatment. Well, and that was also true in like some of the food sacrifice things as well. But once again, the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy cover this in a lot more detail. But there were certain like rituals that were like, okay, you have to burn the meat this way, you have to burn the fragrance this way, because it's just meant to delegate the idea that God gets special treatment and no one else, right? God gets, and I guess the way I always understood it is that like, well, God gets the best, right? God gets your first fruit, right? That's language that you may hear in a church often. God gets your first fruits, right? So God gets the best. You don't offer to God your leftovers, right? So, the analogy that's often used is like, okay, let's say, how much does a person make in like a week? Depending where you are. And let's say your minimum wage in Canada, which isn't that high, you probably make about like $600 a week, if even that. Let me see, 15 times 40. Yeah, 50 times 40 is about 600, right? And that's before taxes, because it sucks in Canada when it comes to taxes. Speaking of taxes, just tell you a funny story. So I bought a physical copy of Bravely Default 2. I might as well advertise this now. That is the next game I'm going to be streaming after I hopefully beat Fire Emblem Three Houses tomorrow. I'm going to stream Bravely Default 2 when it's fresh. All right, it's a brand new game. I'm gonna avoid the internet and not get spoiled on stuff, because somebody's gonna try and put like, here's the end of the game, like on YouTube later today. Somebody's gonna do it. But I'm gonna stream Bravely Default 2. It's a brand new game. I'm gonna enjoy doing a blind playthrough and all that stuff. It's gonna be wonderful. But anyway, back to the relevant story. Why is this relevant, right? The relevant story is that when I was paying for it, I'm going to get it delivered to me. I wanted a physical copy because if it's a game, like, I've been looking forward to Bravely Default too. I've been looking forward to this game. I really love Bravely Default. I'm going to talk about this more when I actually stream the game. But um, what's this got to do with the story? So when I bought it this morning, and I'm going to have it delivered to me, and it's funny because, Amazon's like, oh, we get to you by like tonight. That fast? Like, chill, guy. Like, I don't need it till Monday. But they're going to get it to me by tonight. But when I was paying for it, holy crap, man. Like, I don't know. Like, this is one of the things in the States that's not as bad as in Canada. Because, like, okay, so first of all, you got to deal with the exchange, right? So, like, in the States, it'll cost you $60 to buy a Nintendo Switch game. In Canada, it'll cost you $80. Because that's the rough exchange rate between the Canadian dollar and the American dollar. Spend $80 Canadian or $60 American. But, see, in the States, you don't pay something called a GST, which is like a government state tax. That's what it stands for, right? And that's like that's like $4.50 extra that I have to spend because the Canadian government's like, yo, we're taxing this thing, right? And then not only does the federal government have to tax you, the local government, the province or the state government, in my case it's British Columbia, and we have something called the PST, which is, well, I think it's renamed to the HST was the combination of both. The PST, which is like a product service tax, something like that. Product service tax, PST. And that's like another $5. So I have to pay $80 for the game, and then I have to pay the Canadian government because they want more of my money. Not that I don't already pay taxes, right? They have to tax everything you buy. And now I have to pay like $90, right? And so, okay, where was I going with this? I remember where I was going with this now. So, when I was talking about like a person makes $600 a week in minimum wage in Canada, but of course the government's gonna take tax money, so you actually make a lot less than that. You probably make about like $500 a week. Average Canadian minimum wage worker makes about $500 a week. It's not much. It's actually pretty bad. It's actually really bad if you think about it. But anyway, let's say you make $500 a week. I'm going back to the relevant story now. Okay, you say you make $500 a week, and when you make it, like, you make an offering, like you go to church and they ask you for like your tithes and offering. The idea is that, like, yes, you have expenses to pay, and $500 a week isn't very much, but you can't live in a way that's like, okay, I'm gonna give all, God do like rent money and grocery money and stuff like that. Other things I need to buy and stuff like that, and then whatever's left over is what you put in the church offering. Like, the idea that the Bible puts here is that you don't think like that. Don't think like that. Right? You don't think that God gets the leftovers, but rather God gets the first. And so the tithe was kind of meant to be like, okay, here's a set standard. I think if everybody does this, this could work, right? And so this is actually brought up. I bring this up because it's actually kind of relevant in another passage that we just read. And I know this passage will probably be really controversial, especially today, considering economic differences and the battle of, once again, what is fair wages and whatever. But despite that, the way that you offer to God, that doesn't matter. And so here we go. This is from verse 11. This is the part I'm talking about. This part where it's like, okay, take a census of Israel account. They must pay a ransom for his life at the time is counted, and no plague will come upon them, blah, blah, blah. Each one who crosses over to those already counted is to give a half shekel, according to the sanctuary shekel, which weighs about 20 gerahs. This half shekel is an offering to the Lord. So a shekel is roughly, well, it's metal weight. So it's about 5.8 grams, which is funny because a half shekel is actually not very much. But the part that becomes a little arm wrestle, that some people may take problems with the Bible, especially as a modern reader. The rich are not to give more, this is verse 15, the rich are not to give more than half a shekel, and the poor are not to give any less, to make the offering to the Lord to atone for your lives. So the idea here is that your economic status does not matter, but rather everyone pays the same amount. So when you think about the tithe in the church, it was kind of meant to do that, right? Of course, a tithe is actually a more flexible number, right? Because a tithe refers to a tenth of what you have. So fundamentally, most churches interpret this to be like, okay, let's say a tenth of what you make, right? So once again, you make $500 a week after the government sticks their hand in your pocket because they have to. Paying bureaucrats for being bureaucrats. But after that, you have about $500. And so with the modern Christian teaching would be like, okay, a tenth of that would be $50, right, in your weekly offering. All right, it's not so bad, right? But what's more important is the mindset, right? It's not so much of like, okay, I kind of, well, there's the whole like, yeah, there's part of it's like an obligation, but once again, it's more like, it's meant to teach people not to be stingy, right? There's the practical sense of why, it's not just that the church is being greedy, okay? But there's a practical nature to it. Even if you don't believe in God, you can see the practical nature, right? And that practical nature is, it teaches you not to be like overly self-centered, right? When you give like a tenth of what you have. It doesn't have to be to a church, okay? But like, the idea was you're not greedy, right? You don't think only about yourself, right? Because you don't pick up your $500 a week and think, how am I gonna spend this on myself, right? You're not supposed to think like that, right? You're supposed to think of, okay, what is a good way of living my life? And the chance that I won't have this all the time, right? That life won't always be this good. $500 a week isn't very much, but you get the point, right? There are people who are, jobless, and that sucks, right? So imagine how they have to put up with like, oh man, like trying to survive, right? Let alone being able to try and live. And when I say try and live, I mean like, do stuff with your life, right? So anyway, going back to the mindset though, that what the Bible is really promoting is the idea that like you don't think of yourself first, right? You make however much you make. You don't think about yourself first, which is why it is correct to sometimes poke at why, okay, like certain people have so much money and they're not being charitable with it, right? Why are these, you shouldn't be so greedy, right? And so stingy about it. And you're right to point out those people who are like that. But at the same time, there's like, well, you can't just say rich people should redistribute the wealth, because what about the rich people who give a lot, right? You don't think of like, okay, Bill Gates is a good example, right? Like Bill Gates donates like millions, if not like billions of dollars, like to cancer research, right? He donates so much money, right? So, who can say like, well, that's not fair that Bill Gates still has like this much money, right? And it's not fair that like, he keeps making as much as he does, right? Even though all he does is sit around nowadays. He doesn't do much with Microsoft anymore. He's more of a stock investor in his own company. But that's besides the point. The point is that like he doesn't live with the mindset of like, oh, I only live for myself, because he gives a lot of money, right? To stuff like cancer research and of course COVID research, right? And for that, we should say like, good on you, right? You're not thinking about yourself. And of course, once again, the temple tax had its own function too, right? Because of course the Levites, the priests, had to be provided for. That would be I guess since I'm not gonna probably read Deuteronomy on stream, I might as well talk a bit about it. So when the Israelites move into Canaan, to the promised land, the 12 people, because Joseph's tribe gets split into two, and so there's still 12 tribes in that sense, because the Levites get excluded. So the 12 tribes, which are not the 12 sons of Israel, and easy to get them mixed up. The 12 tribes would be Reuben, Simeon, Judah. See, now it's hard when you have to think about like skipping over Levi. Reuben, Simeon, Judah. There's Gad. Now I'm going to do the rest of them out of order. We have Gad, Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun, Issachar, Benjamin, and then I'm missing one. Because Joseph's two sons would be Manasseh and Ephraim. I'm missing one though. Dan, Gad, Naphtali. Did I say Dan? I think I said Dan. Dan, Naphtali, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher. Whichever one the 12th one is. I think it was Dan that I missed. But anyway, Levi's not included and Joseph is split into two. So, since Levi is excluded, they would, and therefore not part of the 12 tribes of Israel, they don't get an inheritance of the land. So when the 12 tribes moved into Canaan and later became Israel, they divided it up amongst them, right? The 12 tribes. Benjamin! No, I already said Benjamin. I thought I was being clever. I was like, Benjamin was one of those things. No way, I mentioned him early. Anyway, besides the point. So the 12 tribes divided up the land between them, and Levi was not given a cut, right? And so with that being said, you're like, well, crap, right? Now you have one of the tribes, but they're not really a tribe. They're like an offset family group, if you will, that lives in Israel, but they don't have a part of the share of the land. And these would be the Levites. And so the Levites, well, partly because the Levites wouldn't live in one place, right? They would be forced to spread out to all the other tribes to serve as their priest, right? And so with that being said, though, they would have to be taken care of. They would be provided for, right? Economically and stuff like that, right? I mean, a modern equivalency would be like, okay, like pastors still get paid, right? And so do other church staff workers. They get paid, right? How do they get paid, right? They get paid by the rest of the congregation, more or less, right? As the system is that the money goes into the church fund, and then the church fund redistributes that to all the different things in the church, such as building maintenance, ministries that they invest in, and of course paying their church staff. And so a lot of the money offering that's used here, and the Bible obviously had this idea early on, because it's like, okay, God obviously thought about this when he was setting the Levites apart to provide for them economically and financially. But at the same time, that's the reason why whether you're rich or poor, the payment requirement's the same, right? Because everybody should chip in. And not to mention, everybody, once again, people are fundamentally equal, right? And so to be fundamentally equal means everybody contributes and views each other the same. And the Levites are included, despite the fact they're not getting a cut in the distribution of the land when the Israelites move into Canaan, later Israel, right? And so, how does that translate in the world today? Well, I mean, we have a lot of people who do like jobs like the Levites do, right? They're more public service, right? You think of teachers. Teachers are a good example, right? Of course, we've made a system for teachers, and that's how the government system works, right? And the teachers are paid by the government, and that's one reason why we pay taxes, right? Same with like a lot of medical people. Nurses more than like doctors. Doctors are a little different. Nurses are paid by the government, and so that's why we pay taxes, right? And so in a way, taxes kind of function the same way that like this idea that God has a temple tax. He's establishing the temple tax. There's no temple yet, but the temple tax system exists for this reason, right? It's like, okay, we got to provide for the civil servants, right? Civil servant workers. That's what we call them today, right? People like your teachers, police officers, nurses, you know, all your ambulance, you know, all the emergency people count as civil servants, and then like teachers, and then what else counts as civil servant? I think that's all I can think of. It's like the 911 people, so like police, firemen, ambulance, and then you have your nurses, your teachers. I'm sure there are other civil servant jobs. Um, you know, the garbage men. Garbage men kind of civil service. Trying to think of other jobs that are like that. But anyway, they're paid by the government, right? And how does the government get the money? Ideally from taxpayer money. And so that's where our taxes go. At least that's where they should go. But, you know, unfortunately, money does slip through the cracks, quote unquote. Slips through the cracks, but this will probably get me shut down forever, if not assassinated. But, like, you know, this is true across the board. So even if I talk about it in my own country, we know this happens in, like, every country. You know, government takes it for themselves. And that's why, like, you know, despite the fact that you're politicians is supposed to be a civil servant, but yet they make way more money than everyone else. And where does that extra money come from, right? And just taking a bigger cut of the tax money. But it's just the way it is. What do you want? What do you want? Say hello. I'm still talking and reading, Missy. She's like, no, let go. Because what she wants is to sleep on my lap, right? Because that's what cats like. But of course, cats have to get in the way of whatever stuff you're doing, right? I mean, in a cat's world, what am I doing? I'm sitting in front of 2 light boxes, right? That's what a cat probably thinks of your computer monitor, is a light box. I have 2 of them, so my cat's like, you're useless. You're sitting in front of 2 light boxes, right? I mean, in a sense, she's not wrong. I could be doing other stuff with my time, but here I am, reading the Bible to you in front of 2 light boxes. But anyway, yeah, not much to say. I already said everything that could be said about chapter 30. So, there was my hot take of the week, by the way. The thing that would probably get me kicked off the internet. But, whatever. It's true. And we all know it. So, chapter 31. I need to take a quick sip first. Chapter 31. The Lord said to Moses, see, I have chosen, how the hell do you say that? Bezalel, I think that's how you say that. Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled them with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of craft. Moreover, I have appointed Aholiab, I think that's how you say that, Aholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also, I have given them I have given all kind of ability to the skilled workers to make everything I have commanded you. The tent of meeting, the ark of the covenant with the anointment covering on it, and all the other furnishings of the tent, the table and its articles, the pure gold lampstand and all of its accessories, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering, and all of its utensils, the basin with its stand, and also the woven garments, both the sacred garments for Aaron, the priest, and the garments for his sons when they serve as priests, and the anointing oil and fragrant incense for the holy place. They are to make them for you just as I have commanded. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so that you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Observe the Sabbath, because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. It's pretty hardcore. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day is to be put to death. Kind of extreme there. The Israelites are to observe the Sabbath, celebrating it for generations to come as a lasting covenant. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. And in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant law, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. So chapter 31 is pretty short. Sorry, I just had to pick my ear there for a second. It's like, you know that annoying, I hate that annoying feeling where it's like it's itchy inside your ear. So I just wanted to, I used my bow to cover my face while I scratched inside my ear. And it's like that really annoying feeling. And see, it's still annoying me now, right? Even after you scratch your ear a bit. But anyway, chapter 31, just kind of God saying, all right, I have these guys. They'll be able to do all the handiwork. Pretty straightforward. You know, you got this. I assume is what God tells Moses. Like, yeah, you got this. You know, don't worry too much about all the details. These guys, you know, just tell them what to do. They'll get it. They're smart boys. They'll figure it out. And then, of course, there's the second half of chapter 31, which is the Sabbath again. And God is pretty serious about the Sabbath. You know, other parts where he's kind of like, honor the Sabbath. And it doesn't say much more. But here he's like, no, you cannot violate this, right? And of course, one of the issues is that, like, well, why would God make such a big deal about, like, not working 7 days a week, right? I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, of course, but for the most part, it's like, okay, you don't work on the seventh day. You should be put to death if that was the case, and you know, you might wonder, well, why would God do that? But at the same time, it's one of those things where, like, why would anyone want to work on the Sabbath? I mean, if God says, all right, there's a day where no one does work, isn't that like the best thing ever? Like, ideally, you know, it would be better if we had more days off, right? That would be the only thing better, right? If God made like 2 or 3 Sabbath days, like that would be awesome, right? But you know, to go, okay, get one, you take it, right? Because once again, the big contrast is in the ancient world. You know, you don't get a Sabbath, and you think of like, I mean, 21st century, and because the world is the way it is, you know, we don't often do Sabbaths, right? A lot of businesses open 7 days a week, right? You think of like, well, businesses are the best example, right? Businesses, most of them are open 7 days a week, right? So there's no technical Sabbath. Of course, employees are a little different, right? Because, of course, once again, the Sabbath thing can be applied more on a personal level. Well, that's how we view it as moderns, right? But in the ancient world, it was like, no, everybody just kind of stays home, right? So, I mean, social distancing, Bible did it first. But with the Sabbath, right? So it was like, okay, you don't go out, you don't work. I mean, maybe people went out to go play or something. I think play was okay because, of course, actually people are encouraged to play on the Sabbath day as part of the worship, right? As part of fellowship, rather, which is part of the worship. That's kind of the weird transient of logic, right? So the Sabbath day is ultimately for worship, but worship has many aspects to it, fellowship being one of them. And of course, fellowship is like all over the place of how you interpret what fellowship is, right? Because fellowship, once again, part of that is like, it's like, basically think of fellowship as like doing the prides and joys of life, right? Eating out with your friends. Okay, that might be a little harder because you can't have the chef's work, right? So, you know, maybe not quite eating out in like a restaurant kind of thing, but you get the idea, right? You go out with your friends, hang out with them, you know, go on a picnic. You're allowed to you're allowed to have food made beforehand. Yeah, some people say like, but I don't want to eat food that's like I prepared yesterday. But of course, like, I mean, 21st century, we have the fridge, okay? Like, you can prep something, put it in the fridge, and then eat it the next day, right? We don't actually do that in my house though. We're filthy pagans, or filthy Gentiles rather. Not filthy pagans. It'd be hard to be a Christian and a pagan at the same time, huh? But of course, I guess pagan is a relative word because to other people I would be a pagan. But that's besides the point. Anyways, back to the transient of logic and fellowship, right? Play would be part of fellowship. So play is encouraged on the Sabbath because it goes under the whole fellowship thing, right? Going on a picnic, maybe you prepared food the day before, right? And you plan to go on a picnic with your buddies, that's part of the Sabbath, right? And it's part of fellowship, right? Which is a part of worship, right? Of course, there's other parts of worship like the, time, special times with prayer and stuff like that. But that's besides the point, right? But the idea of the Sabbath was that people were meant to be free. And so it's kind of ironic where it's like, okay, if you violate the Sabbath by working on the Sabbath, you should be put to death. But like at that point, it's like, well, isn't the person basically like kind of killing themselves already because like you'd rather be a slave, right? You'd rather not have free time, right? That's as good as being dead. So like maybe putting someone to death for violating the Sabbath would be more mercy than anything, right? Because imagine if people were like, oh yeah, I want to work 7 days a week. No sane person would say that. But like, man, it'd be great if I worked 7 days a week. Like nobody thinks that, right? So maybe putting people to death for violating the Sabbath would have been an act of mercy. Because what kind of sick person would be like, yeah, we should all just work 7 days a week and have no free time, right? Free time is overrated, right? And of course now because of COVID, we have too much free time. So there's obviously needs to be balance, but what the Bible is highly against is that like, no, you give yourself time, right? You give yourself a day off. Heck, give yourself more than one day off. 1 day for you, and then of course the Sabbath day is your worship day, right? Give yourself two. That's why the weekend was invented, right? Was to give yourself 2 days, right? 1 day for you and 1 day for, at least what we should be doing is a day of worship for God and fellowship and stuff like that. And 1 day should be for your self-care, right? But of course, those two can bleed into each other, right? And that's why in modern society, we give a weekend. We give at least 2 days. At least you should give 2 days, depending on your job too, right? And that's where like, okay, the big contrast, right? And it's kind of when you're looking at the Sabbath law, it's like, well, I don't think anyone would have violated the Sabbath law. And, there's no Jewish records of anyone ever breaking it because, once again, who would, right? You'd be stupid to be breaking the Sabbath law, basically. But, in 21st century, like, people working 5 days a week consider that to be a lot. And that's like your full day, right? Or your full week, your 40 hours, right? And then, like, there's those of us who have to work 6 days a week. Sometimes. I don't do that anymore. Thank you, COVID. It's one of the things I love about COVID, actually. I don't have to work 6 days a week. I remember there was a time in my job I actually had to work 8 days a week. Of course, that's not a real thing. What I mean by that is I actually worked over 60 hours in a week, which is a big no-no. Unless you're working multiple jobs, you should not be working 60 hours plus in one job. There were times when I actually worked 72 hours in one job. That's 9 shifts in one job. You know how insane that shit was? You know how terrible that was? I hated it. And then, I still work there, and I hate it. I'm pretty sure no one from my workplace watches this, but, because I technically shouldn't say that. But, like, if you think about it like that, right? Like, if you, working 72 hours a week is, like, awful, okay? And that's more than like what the Bible even says, like work 6 days. Right? Well, maybe not, right? Because remember, if you're a farmer, you work like 10 hours a day, maybe even 12 hours a day. It's a little different, but that's why the Bible commands 1 day, none of that, right? Because yeah, it sucks. Like, and here I am complaining of like, okay, 72 hours with my job, but that's because I had to work in the course of 7 days, right? Because how else are you going to fit 72 work hours? Well, there was a time when I actually did 16 hours 2 days in a row. That's how you would make that work. Yeah, it's a real thing. I worked A funny story about that actually. I worked 2 16-hour days in a row, and both of them were overnight. Because what I would do is I would work from 3 o'clock to 11, which would be one shift, and then you have to go to immediately to the next one, which was 11. But they'd be at the same place. I'd be at the same place for 16 hours, right? And then you wonder, well, what the hell? Don't you sleep? It's like, go home, sleep for 4 hours, and get up and do it next day. Because, you go home, you got to shower, right? Got to eat better, right? Can't just eat while you're out all the time. Because I have no fridge. I would have no fridge where I work, so I would have to eat out each of those days, which one gets kind of expensive, and two, it's not exactly good for you. You should eat more home cooked stuff, unless you're willing to pay a lot more money for healthier food. But oh, no, not when I'm making minimum wage. Yes, this is a minimum wage job too, more or less. $16 an hour is more or less minimum wage in Canada. Well, when it's overnight, you get to make $18. Right? You get the $2 per hour compensation for overnight. But when you're working 16 hours in a row, you don't even. Money is not everything. Okay. If not, it's not very much at all when you think of it like that. But yeah, I actually did, and then I had to do this for 4 weeks. So imagine that, right? 4 weeks, 72 hours. Each week had 2 16-hour days. I looked terrible when I was like turning pale because I wasn't getting enough sleep. I wasn't eating properly, or well enough, right? I was starting to like get sick, and then this was before COVID though. It was actually right before it actually, before the lockdown started. So this was like what, February last year, and it was pretty bad. Well, basically a year ago, yeah, a year ago. Wow, it's weird to think we've been basically in lockdown for almost a year now. But anyway, I had to do these kind of shifts, and oh man, like honestly, that was what really made me hate my job. Right, there are a lot of things that made people not like their job, but stuff like that is what people would make them hate it. And so, um, imagine like, okay, this is the 21st century, and I'm complaining about stuff like that, right? Now imagine in the ancient world, like how much harder it was because you live hand to mouth. That's why you had to work like 12 hours every day, which I guess in 6 days would be 72 hours. Um, but basically, if you're working like that much, you don't get time to like do other stuff, right? And of course, like when I'm working at like my job, I'm lucky that I'm single, right? Because then I don't have to worry about like obligation to a wife or kids, right? Because that would only make it worse, honestly. Um, but just imagine like that much, and I'm complaining about what is probably less than what in the Bible they work, right? Because they probably work longer hours each day. But you know, I would like to claim that me working 72 hours, 2 16-hour days in a row, is a bit much. Um, but there are people, I've seen people that be like, man, I work 40 hours a week. I work too much. It's like, yeah, you do, but like 40 hours is nothing compared to 72. And secondly, like, for a long time, people have always operated under the 40-hour work week. But even now, we're saying like, well, 40 hours is a bit much, right? So, with that being said, who in their right mind would violate the Sabbath, right? Who in their right mind, considering that we want to work less, right? Who would violate the Sabbath law? And according to, you know, I'm some studies, not conducted by me, obviously, but some studies, I don't think there's a historical record of any Jewish person violating the Sabbath law. Which is funny that in the Bible it talks about like, well, the person that violates the Sabbath should be put to death. But at the same time, no sane person would do that, and and Jewish history has no record of it. So it's like I kind of read this part of Exodus 31. You're just like, on the one hand, I get your point, but at the same time, it's like, is this even relevant, God? Like, no one's gonna violate the Sabbath. You'd be crazy too. But anyway, that's just my weird commentary on that. Just thinking out loud about Exodus 31. I know it's a short chapter, but I had to make it kind of interesting. Oh, speaking of interesting. Okay, we're gonna read chapters 32 and 33, and then we're going to end the stream. Because we're in a funny part of the Bible, or the book of Exodus anyway, where we just went through like 10, 11 chapters of like laws, commandments, ordinances that God's like instructing Moses, right? More or less like 10, let's say like 9, 10 chapters, not 11. There was a break in the middle, but now we're taking another one of those breaks, but now we have a longer story than like, oh, they just moved from here to here, right? Actually, no, there was a fight story in there, so it was an interesting story in that regard. Well, here's another one. Chapter 32, this is a story everybody should know, but I'm going to read it first, and then you'll see what I'm getting at. So when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, and they said, "Come, make us gods, who will be before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." So Aaron answered, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings. Sorry, I don't know why I did the voice for the narration. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat, drink, and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people who you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and they have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt.'" "I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn up against them, that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord, and he said, "Lord, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you have brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains, and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever.' Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. So Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, I need a voice for this guy. There is sound of war in the camp. So Moses replied, It is not the sound of victory. It's not the sound of defeat. Is that the sound of singing I hear? When Moses approached the camp, he saw the calf and was dancing. His anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them into pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Gross. Drinking gold. He said to Aaron, What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin? Don't be angry, my lord. Aaron answered, "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' All for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt. We don't know what happened to him. So I told them, 'Whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off.' Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." So Moses saw the people were running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so becoming a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied behind him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord." Then Moses said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword on his side. Go back and forth through the camp, from one end to the other, killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart by the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." So the next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." Then the Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. Alright, so chapter 32 was the golden calf story. Sure, you might have heard the analogy of the golden calf, right? This idea of like a false god is what the idea of the golden calf is, right? And this is the story that inspired it. That's saying. And the idea here is pretty straightforward, right? Like, Israel was pretty quick to fall into idolatry, and the big problem that the Bible points out is that, like, people aren't quick to own up to their own sin. I mean, what else is new, right? I mean, this is the human condition, and this is why sin is such a rampant problem. It's not so much that we do them, but rather we don't own up to the fact that we do them, right? And of course, in our postmodern world, we want to eliminate this idea of sin, right? So that, well, there's no such thing as if we tell ourselves that there's no such thing as sin, then you can do whatever wrong things you want to, and not feel guilty, right? But that obviously comes from the idea of a false god, right? And the false gods are, well, they can be all kinds of things, right? And so the golden calf is an interesting metaphorical figure, because a golden calf, right? Well, first of all, it's made out of gold, so that can be a symbol of wealth, right? And money. And that's a pretty big one, right? I mean, Jesus himself said, man cannot serve both God and mammon, which is the god of money, in the Canaanite world and the Roman world, the ancient world, basically. And so there was that idea. And of course, a calf would be like, a symbol of strength, right? Because cows or bulls primarily, are a symbol of like power, which is funny because in real life, bulls not so much. Maybe, normal cows are pretty useless, even with their massive size. You just put a fence around a cow and they'll just sit there, right? You don't even have to condition a cow to be powerless. A cow just like, you put a fence around a cow and they're like, okay, I guess I'm not going anywhere. Bulls may be a little bit different, but a bull supposedly represents strength, right? And so the golden calf is this metaphor of like the idol of money and of strength. Basically, the idea is your ultimate idol is your self-reliance, right? Which is fundamentally where all idols come from, right? And that's obviously true in our world today. Whatever that may look like for someone else, from person to person, is different, right? But I think the golden calf is an interesting um, figure to use because it perfectly captures both those things, right? Of wealth and strength. And ultimately, the idea that people rather be their own gods, right? As opposed to worshippers of God. And so this is a reason why the golden calf story, people have the idea of like, okay, they know the analogy of the golden calf, or at least they've heard the expression, but like, you should know the story, right? That, you know, Israel wanted to do their own thing, right? Because the contrast in this scene, right? We just went through like 10 chapters, more or less, of like God getting instruction, or sorry, Moses getting instruction from God, right? So the idea is that Moses is the worshiper of God. He's doing, what God commands, right? He's obeying God. He's worshiping God, whatever, right? And so on. In contrast, the Israelites down the mountain are like, well, let's just do our own thing, right? Make us gods that will go before us, which is ironic, right? But the idea is like, you know, make us our own symbol, right? Instead of whatever the hell Moses is doing, is basically what they're saying. And then Aaron is it's a very ironic scene, right? Because Aaron is supposed to be this figurehead that God had appointed to be like the ordained high priest. And here's Aaron basically being an imbecile and caving in to peer pressure. Although to be fair, that's not an easy thing to overcome when it's the entire people of Israel. But of course, the other funny thing is the story Aaron gives Moses, where he's like, well, the people said, like, what happened to Moses, right? He could be dead for all we know. And I said, give me your gold. And I threw in this fire and this calf came out. It's like, a calf doesn't just come out of fire, my guy. Like, and so, like, I'm pretty sure Moses is like, really? That's how you're going to tell it to me? You're going to try and not pin it, like, just own up to it, man. Like, you gone screwed up, right? And of course, like, Moses is like, all right, we got to go kill all the people who started this, which is why it's only 3,000 people that said that were killed that day. It's funny because it says they went through the whole camp and then they killed a whole bunch of people. But obviously 3,000 people isn't that many. But what is probably assumed here is like all these people, the 3,000 people would have been like, well, they would have all been men probably. And they were like all the family heads, right? And so it's kind of funny where like Moses just straight up like, okay, kill every last one of them, but then he only kills like all these figureheads, right, in these different camps. And of course, the other thing that the Bible doesn't really tell us, but what we can assume because logic is that like the people in this camp are, obviously they're all close together, so they all kind of stoked up this whole like, let's do our own thing, right? And they were the ones partying and indulging their revelry, right? And so it was only them that Moses felt like, oh, these guys have to die, right? Because, as we mentioned with the Ten Commandments and the whole idea of the Ten Commandments is this is how you run a society. Now we have these 3,000 guys that are like, breaking commandment 2, making gods and made an image with the golden calf. That's not good for your society. So you can't keep these guys around, right? Got to get rid of them. I mean, there could have been the other way. It's just kick them out of the camp. But of course, the only problem with that is they might join with an enemy force, assuming they don't get killed while they're out there, and then might become Israel's enemies later. So there's that. Not much else to say about this story. I mean, that isn't already self-explanatory. I think one of the funny parts is where like Moses is straight up like, "Oh, please God, like, don't kill these people," right? I mean, you're the one who delivered them out of Egypt. Don't go back on your word on that, right? And God's like, you have like, there's so much sin, like somebody's got to die, right? And so this is where I know a lot of people would probably like say, well, see, this is where like God is contradictory because he would say he wants to save people, but here he is, just willing to go wipe everybody out. It's like, well, the nature of God is that he's holy and that he can't be near sin, right? And so, open rebellion brings upon death. And I mean, you don't even have to apply this to God, right? You think of like any, use medieval fantasy stories as an example, right? Or, medieval literature, and you see in like a lot of stories with like King Arthur in them, right? Where it's like if there's a people that are rebelling, peasants rebelling against the nobility, right? It's like, no, you have to kill all of them, right? Because if they're willing to just rebel against the nobility and the king, then it's high likely they'll go seek out, an enemy nation and even ally themselves just to be a thorn in your side, right? Because that's what people do, right? It it's true of human nature where it's like if you have an enemy, you'll do whatever you can to be a thorn in their side, even doing unsavory things like befriending their enemies, right? And that's something most people don't want to risk, right? And logically so. It doesn't take a lot of brain cells to know that, like, okay, I can't be around these people that are out to get me because they're going to ally themselves with each other and make sure I die, which almost happened to me in real life. So, I mean, I know exactly this kind of thing, right? Like, oh, if I don't deal with this, of course, I didn't kill them, obviously, but like, if you don't bring this stuff up and get like authorities, like the police into it, I could have been a dead man, right? Because there were people that were allied. They like people that would normally hate each other, and it's like, well, Michael's got it. Michael's death is more important, so maybe we should, ally ourselves. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, at least for the moment, right? And um, you know, stuff like that, right? And with that being said, that's why like, oh, you have to like Moses had to get rid of these guys, right? It kind of seems contradictory where Moses is like, oh, God, don't kill these people, and then he goes and kills 3,000 guys, right? But when these guys openly violate, the do not make idols command, and they're the ones who caused it. So maybe like there were probably people that were exempt from it. Um, and this is why I say that the 3,000 people were probably all men as well, right? Because um, it would have been like guys. We wouldn't blame the women that were victims of the guy, guys indulging in the revelry, if you know what that means. Modern words would be like indulge in our vices, right? So uh, certain inappropriate things that certain guys do to women, those guys, right? And it's funny because we would put those people to death today, right? So why is it any different here? And before people start saying like, well, the Bible's so primitive because they did it this way, it's like, no, we would have done the same if you put if you understand it in that context, right? Like these guys, these rebels against Moses didn't just rebel against Moses, right? Well, one, they rebelled against God, and two, they probably would have done other awful things to other people in the nearby camps, right? The other Israelites that would not have gone along exactly, at least willingly, right? You ever watch the Ten Commandment movie? It's an old movie. I mean, it's relevant because this scene is in that movie, and you know, sure, it looked like the women were part of the party too, but like, really, it's like like date raping. Yeah, I said it. That's what I was implying, by the way. I might as well just say it outright, right? Where sure there were women at the party, but it's really these guys are just like getting all these women drunk and then like having their way with indulging in their vices, right? So there's probably other commandments being broken, right? Adultery probably being in there. Do not commit adultery. I mean, um, being in there, right? And so all these guys is like indulging in their vices, quote unquote, and it's just like, yeah, when Moses comes down the mountain, he's just like, what the actual shit, right? And Moses Moses is in. He does what anyone else would do, right? Like if you saw people doing that, you'd be like, no, you're gonna die, right? Anyone like who are the righteous among, who are the righteous among us? Let's all group up and get rid of these guys because these guys are not good for our society. They're not good for our community. They're not good for our society. We gotta get rid of them. So, you know, when people are quick to judge God in this scene about like, well, why would God be like, oh, I'm gonna kill all these people? And even Moses is just like, well, you're the one who delivered them, right? I should don't incur your wrath. But at the same time, it's like when people do evil things like indulge in their revelry, right? It's like no, unacceptable, right? And we would do the same to people today for the same stuff that Moses killed these guys for. So don't give me the whole like, oh, that's them being primitive. It's like no, it's it's just human beings being human beings, and the line between what is righteous and what is not, and you know evil must be put down, right? We as fundamentally as people believe that, right? But of course, the whole reason why God gave us a law was to guide us on what is right and what is wrong, right? Because we all have a sense of things are right and things are wrong, but we need God's help to guide us in how we approach what is right and what is wrong, right? And at times what is appropriate, right? But that's its own thing altogether, and that's why the law books exist. That's why Leviticus exists, right? Because you look at this scene with Moses, and he's just like, yeah, I think the best solution is just to kill every last one of them, right? But at the same time, it's like, okay, maybe that might not be the best idea. Funny thing, I might as well bring this up because I more or less finished the game. Unfortunately, I didn't finish it yesterday. But it's kind of the same thing in like Fire Emblem Three Houses, right? Where Dimitri's first mindset of like, well, I suffered because of, witnessing a tragedy of my family and friends dying, right? All I want to do is kill every last one of them, right? But then, of course, Dimitri does let up, right? As he understands that maybe all this killing is not gonna actually fix anything, right? But at the same time, that's something that all of us, think about and wrestle with in our day-to-day lives. The desire for justice. Now, I know some people always say, well, but to put anyone else's life to an end is unjust, which is hilariously ironic because there are other controversial things we could talk about, but I'm not going to. But I think you are smart enough to figure that out for yourselves, what I'm getting at. But, sometimes, that's why, like in the Bible, they say like, well, killing these kind of people is permitted because your society will collapse. And how do you think something like Nazi Germany happened, right? Is by not putting down the evildoers, but letting them gain power and then putting down innocent lives, right? That's how evil happens. I mean, yeah, it sounds kind of weird to say like, okay, like that doesn't mean you just go around and you kill anyone who's doing bad things, but at the same time, it's like you have to weed out the problems, and sometimes this is the way you do it, right? And we would do that to like, well, not so much anymore because we try to remove the death penalty, but at the same time, the removal of the death penalty has left some people with a bitter taste when it's like rape victims are like the easiest example, right? I know I kind of don't like bringing it up all the time, but it's an easy example of like, oh well, we don't have the death penalty, so we're not gonna put the rapist to death, but the victim as well as the victim's family and friends, they feel like that's not real justice. Like this guy deserves to die for what he did, right? And so, contrary to popular belief, when people think of the Bible and Moses doing something like kill every last one of them, I should do it with I should have an eye patch just to like wear it and then act like Dimitri every time I say it. But anyway, to kill every last one of them. Yeah, when it comes to, what, sure, we don't have to go to that extreme, but at the same time, it's like, well, if you want your society to survive, and this is what one of the objectives God wants Israel to do, the people of Israel, is that no, there needs to be a real sense of justice. And sometimes it does go, justice is a very harsh thing. It is. It's not pretty. Because unfortunately, justice is only really needed in a world that has evil, right? Because if everything was good, if everybody was good, then there would be no need for it, right? We wouldn't need it, because there would be no need to punish evildoers, because if everybody was good, then there'd be no need to do that, right? But that's why justice is such an ugly thing at times, right? Because, some people will do great evil, and therefore great punishment is required. But I think the golden calf story really captures that really well, right? Like how evil it is to stray away from the path of God and worship yourself, right? It will lead to great evil. And so, that's why the Ten Commandments are set up the way they are, right? And that's why do not make idols is number 2, right? Because once we move away from the worship of God and worship whatever else, right? That just leads to bad things. And, using the Dr. Frankenstein story again, right? And why everybody should read Frankenstein. Everybody should read it. That's the Frankenstein story, right? When people try to be God, bad things happen, right? And we create all kinds of unnecessary victims, the creature being one of them, right? And so it's what I'm trying to get at here. I know some people may think that I'm defending Moses' actions, which I am. I am defending his actions to an extent, but I'm trying to give you a good reason why I am defending his actions, right? And his sense and his his logic, right, and his thought process. And I'm also trying to say that, like, well, really, it's not just a Moses thing, right? This is a thing that all of us think and all of us really believe fundamentally, right? But of course, the problem is if we don't have God to guide us without God's law, then we don't know how to go about seeking real justice, which is the problem in our world today. But that's besides the point. But the golden calf is an interesting story because, like, it tries to show that, like, when people worship themselves, what's the first thing they do? Indulge in their revelry and their vices, right? And how many victims does that make, right? Which is why, the 3,000, we assume, men that are killed are, like, the people who make victims out of other people. And, you see in our political climate today, we hate people like that, don't we? Don't we hate people who make victims out of other people? I mean, that's why we fight against things like human trafficking. I thought we were against slavery and stuff like that because we hate people that would create victims, right? And rightly so, right? Because fundamentally we want peace, and a big part of peace is that people can live in pursuit of their happiness, right? But if someone else is making victims out of people, that's not going to happen, right? Unless you're going to defend those people by saying, well, they're pursuing their own happiness, which is the reason why we need God to help us in under defining happiness, because then some person could just say, well, this is what makes me happy, right? Raping women. That's what makes me happy. That's what some people will actually say. And when they say that, it sounds ridiculous when I'm using it as an example, but imagine you actually heard a guy say that. That's something that makes them, and, there's a reason why we hate people like that, right? And rightfully so. And so when we look at people like Moses and like God, when they have this kind of indignant, basically violent reactions, it's like what I'm trying to move away from is that, like, people should not be so judgmental of, like, the Old Testament, saying, like, well, God is all about this mean judgment. It's like, no. If anything, it's the opposite, right? He's not this old, mean, judgmental person, but rather, God doesn't just give us the ass whooping we deserve, right? Because we as human beings are actually pretty terrible, right? When we worship ourselves, right? Which is what the golden calf symbolizes. And that's why it's that shape, right? Why it takes the form of a golden calf is the ultimate worship of self. And when that happens, clearly bad things happen, right? And so on the one hand, it's like, yeah, that should be punished. On the other hand, it's like, oh, it's so tempting just to do it because it's the easy way. And that was another thing too that's like kind of caught in this theme, right? Because the people are just like, oh, we don't need to wait for Moses. He's been gone for who knows how long, right? And who knows what happened to him. Let's just take the easy way out, right? But it's like, no, that's not indicative of life, right? And that's another thing too that we have to consider when we think about like God's laws versus our own, right? It's like, well, what's actually indicative of how we live, right? Because if you worship yourself, you're not going to live for others. And that's a big problem that, the Bible addresses. It's like, well, you can't worship what you want to worship because then you only think about yourself. And that's not going to lead to good things. Once again, Dr. Frankenstein's a great example of that, right? He only cares about what he wants out of anything. And so he indulges in his own vices. And he's a terrible human being. That's why everybody wants to kill him later. Right? And rightly so. But of course, the creature, he saves him anyway because the creature's like, no, I'm a better man, right? I'm not just. And I believe you can be a better man too, right? And there's that whole theme as well. Just give me a second here. My dad's probably calling right now, and I have to take. Sorry, I just had to take that. It's one of those other things. It's just like what makes life tough. Well, because we're talking about my brother as well. Um, he's not well, for lack of better words. Don't want to go into a lot of detail, but just checking. Like my dad was just calling me like if he ate lunch and stuff like that, and in my brother's condition, sometimes he doesn't eat. So, but we have to make sure he eats, right? Because got to keep your strength up. Just because you're sick, you can't not eat, right? But anyway, I've talked enough about chapter 32, but I think the important theme is to understand, the worship of self it leads to bad things, right? And sure, the Bible takes it as a very serious problem, right? I should have opened with this. The worship of ourselves is a very serious problem in the eyes of God. I mean, it's not just a problem for God, it's a problem for us as well, right? Because then all we do is fight each other if we only worship ourselves, right? And all we do is fight each other. And that's exactly what we see in the world today, right? And so I think that's another reason why everybody should know the golden calf story. Well, I mean, you got to know the other stuff before it for context, and some stuff after it for context. But when you understand the golden calf story, you really understand that, like, yeah, it's dangerous when we steer off the path that God has laid out, because then we do whatever, if we think we can do whatever we want, it will only lead to pain and suffering. And you might think, well, I'm not suffering when I do what I want, but that's usually not how worship itself brings pain, right? It's never to yourself, but it's always to someone else, right? Just as another story, I hear this a lot when I volunteer in this slums of Vancouver. the downtown east side, as we refer to it as. And, you know, I meet guys that have like done drug recovery, and they always say the same thing, right? And it's true that, like, you know, when I was in my addiction and you know, like, I made other people suffer, you know, like my family left me and whatever. It's like, yeah, as well as they should have at that time, right? Because when you just do whatever you want, you bring pain onto other people, right? You may not think you hurt anyone because you yourself are not hurt. Of course, when you're doing drugs, you are killing yourself in a way, right? But besides the point, but you bring a lot of pain on other people, right? And that's another reason why the golden calf story, it's like, well, it will bring pain to other people, right? And that's why, like, the Bible is actually really sympathetic because of, like, only the 3,000 men that caused the, you know, the building of the golden calf. And the reason why I say it's men, I might as well, you're probably wondering, why do I think it's 3,000 men? Well, because of what Aaron says about, you know, give me the gold off your wives, your sons, and your daughters. So the safe assumption is that these are all married men because they have wives and daughters and sons to take gold earrings from. So the assumption is that they were men. Transient of logic. So, but it is, you know, they're the ones that they brought a lot of pain onto other people, right? These 3,000 men, and you know, just like Moses, we would have punished them. You know? First, we made them drink the gold, and then we kill them after. It's the most epic way to torture somebody. So, if anything, like, obviously, it's one way ancient civilizations had to deal with stuff like came up with torture ideas, and of course, Moses was kind of on the fly too, right? It's like, just make up a torture system. All right, we're gonna make them drink the gold, and I'm gonna grind the powder. That sounds like a plan. But anyway, um, that's all I have to say about the golden calf story. I mean, there's a lot more I could say about it, but I don't think I'm going to now. Huh. OBS just notified me that I probably lost a couple of frames earlier. It's like frames missed out of like several 100,000 because I've been streaming for like 2.5 hours now. But out of like several 100,000 frames, I have lost 200 of them. Which, I mean, doesn't seem like very much. Like 200 out of like 100,000 is like what, 0.005%. So it's not much, but at the same time, I always just check that. I'm like, huh. But anyway, chapter 33. I'm going to finish with chapter 33 today. So here we go. And the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you for even a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Now Moses used a tent and pitched it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. And anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to that tent, and all the people rose and stood at the entrance to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. So Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, 'Lead these people,' but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, 'I know you by name, and you have found favor with me.'" Well, I haven't been doing Moses' voice. "If you are so pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all other people on the face of the earth?" That's a good question. So the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." And Moses said, "Now show me your glory." The Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." But he said, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." And the Lord said, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." Bum, bum, bum. So, interesting exchange in chapter 33. So, chapter 33 kind of brings this reminder of reality, right? Because one of the funny things when you read through, I was reading through the priest stuff. Last week I read the whole Tabernacle thing. And there's this whole, God is holy, humans are not holy, but God is making a bridge between people and God. And then the golden calf thing happens, and then the reality strikes. It's like, well, if humans cannot be in the presence of God because you're sinful people, and God is a holy God. And so God's like, yeah, if I'm near you, I'm more than likely going to want to murk you. Because, holy God and all versus unholy people and all, right? And the story itself and the setting that you have to paint here is very interesting, that this is the reality, right? So once again, there's the cloud thing again. And when the cloud goes in front of the tent of meeting and it stays in front of the tent, right? And it's kind of like, God kind of hangs up his coat, right? And then he goes into the tent and hangs out with Moses. And then, of course, God even looks at Moses and say, well, because, you're representing these evil people. Because before, God was like, you and I chill, Moses, right? But now Moses, when Moses was pleading, and I didn't mention this earlier, but it's more relevant now, where Moses was like, "Oh, don't blot out the people, right? Blot me out if you're so indignant against the people, right?" And Moses kind of trying to take the hit for, take one for the team, if you will. But now God is like, "Okay, I'll play your game, but that means you cannot look at me in the face, because if you do, just like any of them, you will die," right? And this is a big contrast to like earlier in Exodus, where Moses would go up to the mountain and he would meet with God, and then his face would shine, and then they put like a veil over Moses to like cover him, which was like a analogy of like Moses kind of being a representative of God, right? But now Moses is more representative of a person, of people, right? Which, once again, this is why a lot of Bible commentators and scholars talk about how like Moses was a type of Christ, because Moses does both. He at some points represents God with the shiny face, and then here, where God says, "You cannot look at my face," Moses is a representation of man. Even though Moses and God are normally pretty cool with each other, right? More God being cool with Moses, but that's besides the point. But, now the dynamic is like, well, the reality sank in that this isn't going to work very well, right? So I'm going to go do what I do, right? And you will lead the people as I do what I do. But if I were to be with you, that would be dangerous because, if you're going to represent the people, right? There's a good chance you're going to die with them, right? Now, this is an interesting thing to think about because, of course, this is exactly what happens with Jesus on the cross, right? And that's why Jesus quotes Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me, right? It's exactly this, right? And Moses' story here in verse 34 is kind of, the reality of what that is, right? Well, the implied reality, because Moses does not get killed here. But God is basically suggesting that this is what could happen, right? I will forsake you, right? If I have to travel with you like this because of the stiff-necked people that you're with, and you have sided, you have taken on their representative. You are their representative, so you would have to die with them. In the same way that Christ was our representative for sin before God, and so that's why Christ took death on a cross, right? That he had taken that upon himself. Whereas, Moses, like any mortal, would not be able to do that. But God is clearly suggesting this idea that this is a real thing, right? So we better tread lightly on this. And it's interesting that God has a dynamic, right? And this kind of shift in how people interacted with God. And of course, the Old Testament, is a story of back and forth of people wanting to approach God, but because of our sinfulness, we cannot approach God, right? This is why, we needed Jesus to die for our sins, right? This is exactly why, because we could not approach God, right? Because, once again, the cloud over the tent, and I gave this, I use this analogy so many times, my blasphemous analogy over and over, right? That God's kind of like the Grim Reaper here, right? So the cloud that sits in front of the tent is kind of like, that veil that God covers himself with, right? Once again, use your imagination and the Grim Reaper analogy I've been using this whole time, right? God was fully covered, right? And so he leaves the cloud in front of the tent. And so in a way, what he's doing here is he's exposing himself to Moses in the tent. No one else sees this, right? This is just Moses. And maybe Joshua. It's implied that Joshua's in the tent as well. So God exposes himself to them. And he leaves his coat outside, right? But then, of course, people cannot be in this presence, right? And of course, there's the whole temple parallel as well, right? With the outer temple, the veil that covers the Holy of Holies, which was like the center part of the temple, that kind of thing, right? And so but the reality sinks in that, like, using the Grim Reaper analogy again, because I'm using it a lot, because I guess it's a good one, right? Even though it's kind of weird to think about, it's actually a really good analogy. But like, you cannot be too close, right? But even though there's like this fascination with like, creepy dude in a black cloak with an awesome looking scythe, but you can't be too close because you touch, you die, right? And that's exactly the reality that the Israelites had to understand with God, and why, sin is such a big deal, because you cannot, with the sin in our lives, we come close to God, right? There's that risk. That risk is very real, right? Once again, the Grim Reaper thing, right? Can't touch the guy, right? It would mean imminent death, right? Because that's the popular mythology of the character. And so, in the same way, this is God's interaction with Israel, and the reality sinks in with Israel now. And there are real consequences, right? And they're big consequences. They're literally matters of life and death here, right? And that's a big deal that Israel has to wrestle with, and will continue to wrestle with, as Moses has to lead them in the desert before they get to the land of Canaan, to the promised land, right? But I think the analogy here is interesting, and the allegorical uh, narrative that's being played out here, right? Where God is talking with Moses, and Moses is like, well, I mean, how will you lead us then, right? Because it is terrifying that, you know, you are who you are, and that there it's a matter of life and death here, and how do we where do we go from here? And it's kind of it is a scary prospect, but at the same time, you know, this is a question we must always ask, right? And you know, you think of like the book of Exodus, and I mean that's one of the major themes is that like this is a thing you always have to think about, right? Laws is a good thing, right? That it's a good example rather of things you always have to think about, right? How you conduct yourself and how you live. And so chapter 34 captures one of the most important things about life, right? How do I where do I go? How do I go about not just how I live my life with other human beings as the laws, you know, tell us, but how do I go about my life relating with God? Cuz that ain't easy. It ain't easy, right? Of course, like yes, we have the Holy Spirit now to guide us and continually teach us. But, you know, it is still something we must wrestle with basically all the time, and it ain't easy. So it's just something to really think about. And, you know, this is why Exodus is so important, right? And of course, like, the other thing too, after reading chapter 34, you know, shameless self promotion, but go back and watch some of my Genesis stuff, right? And look at Genesis again through the lens of how do we go about relating with God, knowing that it's a matter of life and death, right? And so I mentioned this in my Genesis videos, and I'll mention it again because it's relevant because we're reading Exodus. You know, Genesis was meant to be a book of prophecy for how the Israelites are meant to live, you know, in the land God will send them, right? And a big part of that is how you relate to God Himself, right? And it ain't easy, right? And Moses was wrestling with this in chapters 33 and 32, but more in 33, right? Like Moses is really wrestling with this, and how do I relate with God? How do I go about this, right? And so it's an interesting dynamic that Moses has now been stuck into. But at the same time, you know, just like how we're not that different from Moses and his like indignant wrath against evildoers, we're also no different from Moses in how we wrestle with how do I talk to God? How do I wrestle with like God's demands in my life? Because He's got a lot of them, but how do I go about that, right? And you know, sure, the average Bible teacher will give you the typical answers, you know, prayer life, reading the Bible, faith, etc. And that's all. That's all obviously true, but I don't want to just throw those words at you without also really saying that like you really gotta delve into that, right? In like, does that really matter to you? And how will you apply that to your personal life? And not just in your personal life, but like how do you really see that as marking who you are as a person, right? And what kind of person does that make you? And all those kind of things. And those are things we always have to think about, right? But anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Chapter 33 is straightforward otherwise. God tells Moses a plan, and Moses goes, okay, it's going to be different now, but we'll roll with this. So with that being said, I'm done reading. I'll do some housekeeping. If you have any questions, throw them into the chat. And then I will end the stream soon because it is approaching 6 o'clock Pacific time. So I will be doing a extra stream tomorrow because I really want to finish 3 houses before I start streaming my new project. Something I've been looking forward to is Bravely Default 2, and streaming it while it's brand new It's going to be a lot of fun. And I hope you guys would really be excited for that. But that will be on Bravely Default 2 will start on Monday. Even if somehow I don't finish 3 houses on Saturday, but I'm going to give myself ample time to do that. Saturday will be at 2 o'clock Pacific time. I'm going to give myself ample time. And, to make room for mistakes, because apparently that map is just cluttered with them. If you watched my stream yesterday. So 2 o'clock Pacific time tomorrow, Saturday, will be 3 houses to finish that final map. Monday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. You know what? No, I'm going to do a little bonus for you. Monday at 2 o'clock Pacific time, because I really want to start playing Bravely Default 2. But I'm also waiting for Monday so I can, experience it with you. You know what I mean? So Monday at 2 o'clock will be Bravely Default. Of course, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will be regular 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. I won't do the extra hour on those days. But Monday, as we start, will also be 2 o'clock Pacific time. So 2 to 6 on Monday for Bravely Default, for the debut of it. Because I'm looking forward to it. So that's kind of the forecast for next week. Of course, next Friday, I will be reading from Exodus 34. So I hope you guys will tune in for that as well. And that's kind of the schedule for next week. With that being said, this is going to be the end of the stream. My throat is dying. And of course, I gotta go get dinner now. So that's the thing. But I hope you guys enjoyed this reading stream. You guys learned something. And I will see you guys tomorrow for 3 houses, and hopefully Monday for Bravely Default. And definitely, hopefully, see you guys next Friday for continuing Exodus from 34. Hope you guys have a great day. I hope you guys have a great weekend. And God bless you.